Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining for another installment of Shielded Dialogues. Today, we're going to be discussing the recent Dev Fund and funding model governance polls that wrapped up earlier this month. Before we get into the discussion, I'll start off with a bit of background. Last year, the community voted to implement ZIP 1015, which allocated 8% of block rewards to Zcash community grants and 12% to a protocol lockbox for 1 year, while the community developed a new non-direct funding model. The main principles driving ZIP 1015 were that the community no longer wanted to provide direct funding to organizations like the Electric Coin Company and the Zcash Foundation. Instead, the community wanted to transition to a grants-based, non-direct funding model. In addition, the community wanted to further decentralize governance and develop a disbursement mechanism and governance process for future funding decisions before the funds accumulating in the lockbox could be accessed. ZIP 1015 is set to expire in November 2025, and without a new dev fund, 100% of block rewards would default to miners. This would eliminate funding for grants, which could significantly impact ongoing development and the sustainability of the core Zcash organizations that rely on that funding. At the same time, there was concern that adopting a new dev fund could delay the other ecosystem priorities, like Zcash dedeprecation, NU7, and the activation of Zcash shielded assets. So there was a call for proposals and a coordinated effort to gather sentiment from the community and coin holders on the future of the Dev Fund and a potential new funding model. There were 5 proposals put forward to create a new Dev Fund, each with its own unique approach to how funding should be allocated and governed. Some of the proposals aim to give full control to either coin holders or ZCAP voters, while others proposed a mix that split funding between ZCG and a second pool managed by either coin holders or ZCAP. One proposal, called the Zcash funding block, introduced a DAO-like structure where multiple stakeholders would share decision-making power over different grant pools. The community was polled to assess their preferences on the proposed funding models, and in the end, the results across all polling groups, including ZCAP, ZAC, ZecHub, and an on-chain coin holder vote, were aligned and showed clear and broad support for the Community and Coinholder, or CNC, funding model. This model allocates 12% of block rewards to grants selected by coinholder vote and 8% to Zcash community grants. The coinholder vote saw participation from nearly 1 million ZEC, which is the highest turnout in any Zcash governance process to date. So today we're going to discuss the process and outcome of these governance discussions and also focus a bit on next steps for implementing the CNC model. I'm joined today by Josh Swihart, CEO of the Electric Coin Company, and Alex Bornstein, the interim executive director from the Zcash Foundation. Josh, let's start with you. What are your overall thoughts on both the governance process and the outcome that led to the adoption of the CNC model?
Well, it's been a little chaotic, but it's a massive shift at Zcash that we've gone through over the last, because this is really kind of the culmination of many months of conversation in the community, right? It's like, what is the future of the Dev Fund, and how are decisions getting made about what goes into the protocol, and how are funds received, and so we've gone through this conversation with the community. There was controversy around the Zcash Foundation ZCAP and how much of a voice that was, and are there other kind of polling mechanisms, and I think kind of going into the last one, and there's some other community groups kind of stepped forward with some different polling, and then there was some coin holder polling. But I think this one, we got to a place where I think coin holders have more of a voice than they've ever had as it relates to how funding happens, really. And ultimately government governance, it's my opinion, but I think it's a pretty good one, is that it's basically at 3 layers. One is the market, and are there people that want to buy and use the token? And that's, we see a reflection of that in the coin price. And because we have a limited supply, the market come in and say, like, we believe in this or we don't believe in this. There's another layer, and it's the devs, right? And the devs the core developers manage the Gitcoin, or not the Gitcoin, the GitHub repo, and have some say as to what what code is merged into it. And so and then ultimately there's this other layer, which is the people that run the software. So whether it's exchanges or miners or that kind of thing. So if those things, there's not a like formal coordination. It's more of an informal coordination where if the market leaves, then there's really no funding to fund developers, or the market can choose to fund other developers and get behind other developers. But then if people don't run the software that those other developers put forward, then there's no project or token either. So there's this coordination that happens between these three layers, and I think we've seen more coordination in terms of, or more voice in this last process than we've ever seen with various proposals that have come up with the market voting with their tokens on what they want to see in terms of how funding is allocated. And we're still kind of going through the process of the software. There's no forks or anything like that. So it's been a pretty amazing shift from it was still decentralized with the foundation and ECC, but still a fairly centralized kind of funding and governance process where there's guaranteed funds, to this one now that is outcome based. There's accountability. It's more bicameral in structure, where you have community representation and coin holder representation. And I think it's fantastic for the evolution of the project.
Alex, what about you? What's your overall thoughts on governance and process in both terms of governance process and the outcome that led to the adoption of the CNC model?
Yeah, I think the process reflected some of the best aspects of the ecosystem, like cross-organizational collaboration, clarity of purpose, solid communication, and like a shared effort between the orgs. And by working together, we streamline the path to releasing and completing the polls, which kept attention like squarely on the issues instead of like drama surrounding how the polling was going to be done or what the questions were, those kinds of things. And I think that focus really helped like not just streamline the process, but make it clear that people understood what they were voting on, what they were really like, was their vision reflected in what they were voting for the future of Zcash. Of course, there's always room to grow. Like, we needed to get more familiar with Helios and potentially other ways of polling. Obviously, like the coin holder mechanism, voting mechanism needs to evolve. I think it's amazing what happened with coin holder voting, and the fact that we got that out there, like the work that you did and the work that Han did and others, really is just light years ahead of where we were just recently. So, overall, I think this is an interesting blueprint for how these things can work in the future, but there's plenty of room for improvement and kind of iterating on this. But like as a foundational kind of new day, new Zcash, kind of like new spirit of collaboration, like this really articulated why that is a powerful thing for the Zcash community and the Zcash protocol overall. And we have so much work to do. Like, we all acknowledge how much work needs to get done. But we're all talking, we're all communicating, we're all trying to, utilize our resources in the best way possible. And I think both the process and the outcome really facilitate and will help that kind of positive outcome.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I thought the process started off really slowly. I was a bit concerned at the beginning. It seemed like after last year's Dev Fund discussions, the community was burned out on governance, and discussions were limited, and a few proposals were put forward from the community. Josh, most of them came from you at the beginning. But it wasn't until a deadline was set and clear zip submission process was outlined that the community started to get more involved. And from there, like, momentum grew and people put forward other proposals. And I was happy to see that in the end, the community had a few different proposals to choose from. But like Alex said, I think overall things were very collaborative. There were open discussions among all the different organizations or community polling through multiple channels, and the coin holder vote, like, just, you know, was the participation was incredible. And it, the polls all together, were in line and demonstrated a clear consensus. And overall, I'm happy with the CNC because I think it reflects a very balanced and easy to implement funding approach that now brings coin holders into the fold and continues to support the Zcash Community Grants Committee, which, in my opinion, has done a great job of over the years of just helping decentralize the ecosystem. But similar to what Alex said, it was very encouraging to see ECC, ZF, and Shielded Labs work together to support the CNC model. The sort of collaboration has not been possible in the past, and it shows that ecosystem dynamics are maturing and sort of headed in the right direction. But I think what was most significant was this was the most significant coin holder vote in Zcash history, with nearly 1 million coins participating. Sentiment around coin holder voting has clearly shifted, and with the adoption of the CNC model, it's now a core part of how grant funding decisions will be made. So next question is, what are your thoughts on the shift and the growing role of coin holders in Zcash funding and governance? And Alex, I think it makes sense to start off with you, given that historically some members of the Zcash Foundation board and leadership team have been opposed to coin holder voting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll start by saying, the ZF board provided an endorsement of the CNC model. So obviously there's a shift in thinking there. And I think the shift overall is a really big deal. And I personally think it's the right one. I believe everyone who cares about Zcash should have a meaningful way to express their vision for its future. And the more inclusive we can make advisory voting, the stronger and more resilient our protocol becomes. So giving coin holders a real voice, creates deeper engagement, deeper alignment, improved decentralization, broader engagement, and like a structure that reflects the full spectrum of our community. So like super impressed, like I said previously, like the fact that you and Shielded Labs and Han and Dismat and others jumped in to really make this what it was is super impressive. And I think, like, as a start, it's not the starting point, since we did try this before, right? This is part of the evolution of coin holder voting. I'm really excited to see what comes next. There's obviously some big decisions that'll have to be made in the future, as there always are. And it's like encouraging to know that all of the various ways we're polling the community are all maturing. And obviously it's a bit easier on the Zcap and Zac side because the technology is pretty basic, but seeing the coin holder voting mechanism plus the outcome, and like you said, Jason, the adoption is really extraordinary. So I'm really hopeful about the future, and I think we can only be strengthened by giving all Zcash community members, regardless of kind of how they move in the community and what their level of engagement is. There's like a different path to voting and being engaged and having their voice heard, and I think that's super healthy. It's really healthy, and it's not specifically focused on any one group or any one constituency or anything like that. It really is an inclusive way of going about this, and I think the polling and the smoothness of how this just went really, shows that.
Josh, what about you? I know from early on, you really tried to get coin holders included, both with the Z block, where coin holders were a constituent, and then ultimately with the CNC model. What are your views on this?
I think it was really important. We got a kind of theoretics. So we have these like long conversations about plutocracy and who gets to make decisions, and ECC and ZF making decisions in the past, and ECC kind of having a stranglehold on a repo with Zcash D, and then it's like, oh, we can't give coin holders like all of the power, because then the rich people are going to override the smaller holders, and there's some like validity in some of those concerns, right? I think about like there's a parable of the widow's mite, right? Of you have somebody that only maybe they have they only can afford 5 Zec and they vote, or they want to have a say versus somebody, and that's like 90% of their wealth, and you have somebody that's a small percentage of their wealth, but they hold, 1 million coins. And how do you deal with those kinds of things? And so the CNC model is not like a pure coin holder governance model. It's a funding model, and there's some checks and controls in place that allow for the coin holders to have significant voice, but not necessarily determine everything that's going to happen in the protocol. We still have this kind of multi-tiered governance structure in terms of how the protocol gets managed. So having, the people that have skin in the game, right? There's a lot of people in the forums, it's a lot of well-meaning people and things like that. You just don't know, like, do they really have any skin in the game? They may be very loud voices. They may have a lot to say. They may be very opinionated, but we don't necessarily know what the incentives are. So this, with the coin holders making a decision or making more decisions about like what gets funded and how that potentially impacts their holdings and what they're able to do with the tokens, I think is really powerful. It's like almost a shame we didn't get here sooner. But I think it's a really important shift, and it's much better, again, I think, for incentive alignments, not just with the orgs, but across the community, and how funding, how dev funding is dispersed.
Yeah, I think it's great. With regard to the shift in sentiment, I mentioned in my discussion with Zuko last month that I think having a mechanism that supported shielded voting made it easier and safer for more people to participate. And that in and of itself really gave the process more legitimacy and encouraged more people to participate. And we did a few different practice votes, and like most things, the more people use something, the more comfortable they get with it. And that sort of helped shift the perception from controversial to credible. But honestly, like, it sort of felt like things shifted almost overnight, right? Because I feel like there was just broad consensus against coin holder voting. And now it's amazing to look and see that it's actually going to be responsible for allocating a significant portion of the Dev Fund towards grants. And it's super healthy. It's sort of, like you said, Josh, I think it's sort of shame it didn't happen earlier, but it's great that we've arrived here. And overall, it's just very cool to see coin holders used in governance discussions as an input to gauge sentiment. I mean, seeing 1 million coins get voted was just blew my mind. Like, I think the last one was in last year's Dev Fund discussions, it was 500,000, so it was pretty much double participation. And now having it part of the grant funding decision-making process is just, I think, really a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's a sign that coin holders care, right?
Yeah.
That they step forward. It's still non-trivial to vote. I mean, light years, like me personally, this was the first time I ever voted my coins. I wouldn't do it before. There's just too much risk. And so we had tooling available, that it was set up from the beginning that this was going to be meaningful. It wasn't just a trial. I think was really important as well.
Let me ask you, do you have plans to integrate the coin holder mechanism into Zashi?
We would like to. So there's a process that we still need to go through, and Shielded Labs has responsibility for pulling together a zip that describes what the coin holder voting process looks like and how that might work, and how that might work with different tools and different wallets. And so a little bit we're wait to see where we land in terms of how the polling is going to be conducted, and as we kind of go through that process. But if there's an opportunity to add support for polling within Zashi, or something that we might explore called Zashi Vault, which may have more advanced features, we would like to provide that as an option for Zashi users.
Okay, that's great to hear. You mentioned this, like, what are the next steps required to bring the CNC model to life before the Dev Fund expires in November 2025, and sort of what should the community expect?
Yeah, so I posted something in the forum just a day or two ago that describes some of the next steps. It's almost kind of in two parts, although there's, I don't know, a dozen steps or so, I think, outlined in that post. The two parts meaning that there's a short-term distribution mechanism and there's a longer-term distribution mechanism. And the reason that there's two is because the longer term will require a transaction format change, which is more cumbersome for the ecosystem to adopt. And so we want to have as few transaction format changes as possible. And since NU7 will already include one, and we have a mandate to get something out earlier than that, we've kind of broken this into the two phases. So one phase is to kind of clean up this first one is to clean up the zip that's out there, to have a one-time distribution mechanism of the existing lockbox funds with the P2CH kind of multi-sig. That won't be the long-term solution, but doesn't require the transaction format change, and that can be done, immediately or very quickly. And then there's a longer-term kinds of solution, which may include like Frost for multi-sig or other things. There's consideration for things like the coins that have to be shielded coming out of Coinbase and so on. So there's some pieces that have to be designed and built. That will take a little bit more time, and then we can roll that into a single upgrade within U7. So you'll see this kind of these kind of steps in there. There's some other tasks. The signing organizations need to sign a legal agreement. The Zcash Foundation has stepped up to get a legal agreement put in place so that that all of us that have signing keys have legal responsibility to care and to care for those keys and to care for the process and some things like that. But all of them are in that forum post.
Okay, Alex, from ZF's end, what do you expect in terms of next steps?
I mean, I think Josh, articulated it really well. I think what's really encouraging about this is we're speccing this out all together from the start. We're talking, making sure, responsibilities are allocated to each kind of group's core competency. Really appreciate, Josh and ECC taking like a lead role in this. I think it's fantastic. And, the fact that all of us will have important roles to play throughout this process to ensure it gets implemented is exactly how these things should go. And I think it makes it's encouraging, but it's also, again, a question of resource allocation and responsibly stewarding our resources, by upfront saying this is what's happening, this is who's doing what, and making sure that there's clarity just allows us to focus and get the work done and move on to the next thing. And I think it makes something that's challenging. And, as Josh mentioned, there's kind of challenges throughout this, like there's been any process. It means we can focus on those challenges instead of, asking who's doing what or thinking somebody's doing something when they're not, or, et cetera, the things we've kind of experienced in the past. So I'm really encouraged, and I think it's a nice continuation from all the things we've been talking about related to how we got to this place in the first place.
Agreed. Yeah, and from Shield Lab's perspective, I mean, we'll, like Josh said, we'll run the ball on drafting a zip outlining the design of the coin holder voting process. I'm sure it'll be very similar to what we've experienced in the past. And we'll also organize and coordinate the first coin holder grant vote. And hopefully we can do that at some point, like either late in the third quarter or early in the fourth quarter. Okay, so another question, like what impact do you think that implementing the new funding model will have on other roadmap priorities like NU7, deprecating Zcash D, and activating ZSAs?
Yeah, so it's going to have some. Yeah, it's going to have some. So we have what will likely be a network upgrade 6.1, and that will include a one-time distribution mechanism, and that will be inserted before NU7. We think that, generally speaking, when you have a network upgrade, the ecosystem can only tolerate so many per year. And the rough rule of thumb has been roughly every 3 months. So once the network upgrade 6.1 is rolled out, then it'll be a minimum of 3 months until network upgrade 7. With the amount of work, the estimates are about 2 to 3 months to get the pieces implemented, depending on how the design, the design of the signing and so on. So I anticipate the earliest that 6.1 can be activated is mid-August. I anticipate it will probably take a little bit longer than that. And then you're looking at a minimum of 3 months post. You don't want to have a network upgrade over the holidays. That creates other kind of ecosystem challenges. So NU7 is likely Q1 of next year. I thought it was going to be Q1 anyway, just because it's going to take a while for the ecosystem to adopt a new wallet and new node software. Just takes time, independent of the technology itself. So that's what I'm currently anticipating. It's kind of really up to the devs and the folks working on it to make sure that we get it done within those timeframes.
Alex?
Yeah, I think my response is a little more philosophical. Obviously, I agree with everything that Josh just said, but I mean, to me, the biggest impact is focus, like with a clear funding model in place, in a clearly articulated path to implementing NU 6.1. We can channel our energy into execution. So, like that clarity allows us to plan confidently. It allows us to coordinate more effectively, move faster on critical roadmap items like NU7, ZSA activation, winding down Zcash D. And this is how we like accelerate development in the protocol overall, like by aligning around shared goals, by utilizing the core competencies of various teams, like I mentioned before, and removing the communication and collaboration barriers that slow us down. Like I feel like we're all kind of hitting our stride at the right time, and knowing all these things that we need to kind of like knock down as dominoes to get to level Zcash up to the next level. Like we know what those things are. We know what work needs to be done. We for the most part know who's going to be doing that work. And so like I feel like we're in a really encouraging spot where we get to like utilize these amazing teams all three orgs have, and then the exterior orgs that are grant funded and doing other work. And we really get to see like how like it's like almost having like this super nice car, and we finally get to get on the highway and like hit the accelerator and see how fast it can go. And I really genuinely feel like we're in a great place. We're setting ourselves up for success, and I think like that's, as leaders of these orgs, I think that's like a super important it's super important place to be. And I hope you guys feel the same, but not that we won't face challenges, not that there won't be roadblocks along the way, but I think we're creating something here that's strong enough to push through those things and kind of get to the other side stronger than we were before. So pretty encouraged, very encouraged. And I think there's just so much on the horizon that we have to look forward to and like work towards. And that's really motivating.
Are you still optimistic?
No, I was just going to pile on to that, because I don't think it can be underestimated the amount of stress and distraction, the kind of conversations around Dev Fund, governance, priorities, drama in the community, like the amount of stress and anxiety that creates with the core dev teams and what that means in terms of our ability to execute quickly. Like Alex is spot on. That alignment has never been stronger across our community than it is now. And I do think it's going to really help us accelerate, and it's going to actually help us to do a better job to clear some of the clutter out of the way.
Yeah, it just one thing to add to that too. Like we will have disagreements. Like we're not going to agree on everything, but I think the way we're going about this sets it up so we can have a disagreement that we work through to get to the next step. It's not in and of itself a blocker, and like that is super important as well. Like I don't think anybody wants all the orgs just always agreeing with each other. Like it's nice to have some pushback here or asking questions, or but we can do it in a respectful, meaningful way that strengthens the whole project and move forward. Like that's super healthy. Yeah, and I hear the same thing from our core team. All engineering is all about focus, and to be able for them to be able to put their heads down and just work towards this kind of shared goal. I mean, we can't ask for much more than that. Like that's what we're shooting for.
Yeah, that's great. I agree with you 100% that the org shouldn't always be aligned, and they should have different views on like the future of Zcash. And they shouldn't always agree. But I do think it is important, and we need to do a better job of sort of meeting deadlines or setting realistic deadlines. But a couple thoughts that I had here is, one, our intention in including the second question in the poll was to make it clear to the community that prioritizing the implementation of the new funding model could delay other projects like NU7, deprecating Zcash D, and ultimately activating ZSAs. And I think Conrado mentioned something on the forum, and I sort of agreed with them. I was surprised that such a large majority of the community and coin holders were comfortable making that trade-off. And so I guess what you can infer from that is that it's clear the community, really supports the Dev Fund and wants to see funding continuity. But that said, I do think that we sort of need to be as clear as possible about timelines so that the community knows what to expect. And we talked about this recently. I understand that NU 6.1 is more straightforward than other network upgrades, and we have an awesome plan in place, and we have a good sense of what we need to do to proceed. But there's this thing where unexpected things always happen, and if implementation impacts the broader NU7 roadmap, then it's sort of important that those changes are communicated early and sort of transparently. If I could change anything about like the Zcash ecosystem, I just wish we were better about giving more realistic or like worst case timelines, because I'm really not a fan of like best case scenarios, because I mean, if history serves as a reference, it just never plays out that way.
Yeah, the challenge here, and it's valid. Like, we historically have not been very good at estimates. Like NU5 was the one that killed my soul the most, because we would have an estimated date and then slip to the next quarter and the next quarter, and then we're going to add unified addresses, and it's going to slip another 1 or 2 quarters because the amount of complexity in dealing with the wallet and Zcash D and so on. And so there's validity in keeping the scope tight in order to be able to hit milestones. When you have a big milestone, like when you have something like ZSAs, which is a big one, there's a lot of variability, and that's in estimating any software. So any kind of complex software at the beginning, you're going to be orders of magnitude off on your initial estimates, and you get closer and closer to those estimates as you get closer to the end. The added complexity that we have is that we're making major changes while the airplane's in flight. And so weather conditions change, something comes up, if there's a vulnerability or something that distracts the team from that narrow focus, then it can throw dates out. And the other thing is, because we're not just building another protocol, Zcash is not just another blockchain, it's privacy preserving. And you screw one thing up, and you've screwed it up forever, right? It's very difficult to come back from if we mess up the privacy stuff. And so we have to be very, very careful about what we're doing, take our time with audits. Audits can reveal things, making sure that we're double checking things and doing things the right way. And then the third thing is like, we don't only control what we can control. So like when I talk about the ecosystem rollout, we can focus on delivering quality code is going to work and all of that kind of thing. And if we have major exchanges, or we have miners or something like that that are uncertain and have their own timelines, that's not something that we have the luxury of being able to control, unfortunately. So yes, we need to do a better job of estimating. Shorter milestones are helpful with that. But also keep in mind, what we're trying to do is pretty massive and pretty challenging with very limited resources.
On the resources, do you think that having the process be more decentralized, meaning that it's not just ECC doing it, it's like blockchain commons, it's ZF, it's Zingo, so on and so forth, like, is that helpful, or does that sort of—
It's both. It's both, right? Because the more different kinds of entities that you have, the more people working on it, you have coordination problems. So that creates added complexity. It's great for decentralization. It's not great for speed. And so there's some things that we can do to like chunk up responsibilities, and you have a team that's focused on a very narrow scope that allows you to accelerate on that one thing. But it doesn't necessarily mean it all comes together as quickly, because you can't, like ECC can't control the priorities of the Shielded Labs team or the ZF team, and so on. We can try to coordinate as best we can. But yes, additional developer resources can help speed up the process, but it's not a it's like the baby analogy, right? It's still 9 months to take a baby to have a baby. It's still going to take what it's going to take, and if you try to split that up into too many pieces, it's actually going to add time.
Yeah, I think another element to that is that historically ECC has been like the one overseeing the Zcash D implementation, and because of that, I think there are a lot of growing pains with bringing new orgs in to where they don't have the background or the familiarity with the code base in order to just sort of like add immediate value, right? Like it takes time to get up to speed. So I think that's a problem that we're seeing as well that can potentially slow things down.
Well, and we're going to be go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe. You finish your thoughts.
No, I mean, we're going to be able to do bigger things in parallel, right? Versus all, like, if we all try to collaborate on one piece of, like new capability for Zcash, it's going to be very difficult. If we can say, okay, Shielded Labs, for example, has proof of work, proof of stake, it allows Shielded Labs to execute on that thing and to move very quickly with a very narrow focus. And I think that allows us to add more faster. But those big chunky pieces of work are still going to take they're going to take what they're going to take. And there's other bottlenecks that we need to fix, like the pull request time frame, how that gets done. Like ECC takes too long because we just don't have enough resources to do all the reviews. So there are places like that where whether it's pull request reviews, whether it's developer outreach, like the DevRel kind of function to be able to support other organizations, because that for ECC has historically taken time, where somebody comes along and say, I need to get up to speed on this, can you help? And the core team is very good at like jumping in and trying to help, but it's a lot of time and it's a lot of context switching, which costs us on the overall schedule. So there are some places I think we could streamline by better collaborating and kind of leveraging the collective resources that we have. Much better than we do today.
Yeah, I agree with everything Josh has said. I would also add that, like, historically, in my opinion, like Zcash Foundation has done, we could have done a better job articulating how outside teams could contribute to the work that we're doing, and like where we have needs for inputs and assistance and expertise. And I think the more all of our orgs and grantees and others who are supporting all of this work are able to articulate, what support they can provide, or we even better can articulate what help we need and the best way to support our efforts, that's going to kind of marshal these forces much more efficiently. And like Josh said, like we all have limited resources, and I think all day about ZF's resource allocation and how to best use the tools and the expertise and core competencies we have to move things forward, and how best can ZF contribute to this bigger thing that's happening and also pushing our priorities forward as well. So I think we all can improve communication and articulating needs and wants. And I think like all of these processes where we're having these conversations publicly, we're having this conversation today, all like kind of build the bricks in that wall going forward. So we can say like, hey, I need help, like ZF needs help on this, or ECC needs help on this. And I think the more we're able to improve on that, the better resource allocation and speed we'll have. And one other just kind of quick note, like when I say collaboration, like to your point, Josh, you were saying, like the work can go on in parallel, as long as we're not doing work over each other, like as long as we're not being redundant, then that's super powerful. But in order to do that properly, there has to be very clear communication on who's doing what, why, how does it fit into this, and and I think again we're headed in that direction. So yeah, it's really really encouraging.
You guys have any closing thoughts or anything else you want to say?
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. This was a great conversation. Thanks, Josh and Alex, for your time today. If anyone has any questions or wants to chime in on this topic, feel free to reach out to us on X or on the Zcash community forum. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.